Today I have Courtney O'Grady with us, so she can share her experiences with inclusion in a Catholic preschool setting. So, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm
Yeah,
excited to
absolutely.
share my experiences.
Great. So, why don't you just introduce yourself and who you are and what your background is, and then we can get started.
Sure. So, hello, I'm Courtney O'Grady, and I'm a doctoral student focusing on early childhood special education at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And like Robin mentioned, I was a preschool teacher in a Catholic school for 6 years, and it was a great experience.
Yeah, good. Wow. So 6 years you spent teaching preschool in a Catholic setting. Okay. Well, you have a great deal of experience then in that realm. So that's great. So tell us a little bit about those experiences
Sure.
in that inclusive preschool classroom in a private parochial school. And what did you like best about teaching in that setting? And what were you passionate about in that setting?
Sure. So I got started when my background is all in early childhood. So my bachelor's degree is in early childhood, then my master's degree is in early childhood special education.
Mm-hmm.
And so after completing my master's, I taught for 4 years at a university lab school,
Mm-hmm.
and then had my two boys
Uh-huh.
and was a stay-at-home mom with my two boys. And then we had kind of an interesting experience with my older son when he was in preschool.
Okay.
We had him in our local Catholic school, and it was not as inclusive as we would have maybe hoped.
Uh-huh.
And we reached a decision kind of in conjunction with the school that it was just not a good fit for our son. And so we transferred him to the public school. But throughout that kind of process, I thought, well, here I am sitting on this early childhood special ed degree, and here's this clear need for a setting to have to be more, there's an opportunity for schools to become more inclusive if they have teachers with the passion
Sure.
and experience and education to maybe do that. So I started looking just kind of casually for positions in a Catholic school and found one almost immediately that was an ideal position. It was close to home. It started out part-time. It was just a really good fit. And so ended up there and loved it.
Oh, good.
And so it didn't start out super inclusive, but then word kind of got out that there was this preschool teacher who had a special ed background, and then we were able to become more inclusive while I was there.
So the whole school was able to become more
Well,
inclusive?
and the school was more inclusive in the older grades because they did have, and one thing that made a huge difference in that particular setting is that they had a response to intervention and student success
Gotcha.
team. So there was always support staff for the older kids.
Okay.
And then I think it wasn't just me, it was just kind of the overall culture of the school was the desire to be inclusive and welcoming to a wider range of students.
Wow. Well, that had to have felt rewarding to be able to kind of move that then into those early years with their program there and to be a part of that.
Yeah, it was really exciting.
That's great. So what specific strategies have you used to support kind of these pillars of inclusion in that kind of setting?
I think the main thing is just to start out with an open attitude about being inclusive. I think certainly there are students whose needs we could not meet, and so it's not that you can be open to any kind of need or student, but to be open to the ones whose needs you can meet with slight with modifications and supports that we could put in place in the classroom. So one thing that was hard is that we didn't have provisional or related service provision. So we didn't have like an in-house OT, PT, things like that. So those needs were harder to meet. Although actually while I was there, the school did partner with an agency that could provide speech therapy in-house, but parents had to pay for it privately through insurance and things like that. So we did have speech.
Okay.
And then
so parents, if they were able to line that up with their insurance with this provider, that provider could come to the school for the preschool kiddos who needed those services. So during that is an advantage for families. It could be, right, that then they don't necessarily have to take off work to take their child to an appointment. You don't have to fight for those 3:00 slots, and if that partnership can happen, and then it works with your insurance. It's not perfect, but it's
but still it allows an opportunity to be in a setting that otherwise you might not be able to.
Right. Well, good.
And then I just did a lot of supports within the classroom. So things like being very careful about how I arrange the environment, being very intentional about the environment using a lot of visuals, having a picture schedule, trying to be flexible so that I would meet the needs of my individual group of students year to year, and I used an emergent curriculum, so I didn't do the same, it wasn't like a set thing or prescribed thing, that I had the flexibility to
adjust
to adjust and to base things off of the children's interests and things like, and to use that as a motivator. If there was a child that I knew needed to work on fine motor skills, and they were really interested in, say, cars, then we might, rubber band a car to a crayon or whatever, so that, to try to get them to come over to the writing table and things like that. And it was a play-based program and not as much academic focused, which I think allowed for greater opportunity for student success, because it wasn't like I had set goals academically for the class-wide. It was more individual goals. And I also should preface that I taught the 3-year-olds.
Okay.
So that helped too, that, I wanted to...
Because those would be the first year in the program, right?
Right. So that helped. I was big on using a lot of social and emotional supports. So we had things like a solution kit, so that a friendship kit paired with visuals and concrete tools, and there was a lot of intentional direct instruction on social emotional supports. Lots of communication and engagement with families. That was something that was really important, to build those relationships with parents and to partner with parents from the beginning. Because my main goal as an early childhood educator was to make that first school year experience just as overwhelmingly positive as possible for the student, for their family, for other students, for our class, and to really build a classroom community.
Right.
And so that was, I think, something that is really essential to being inclusive, is to establish that sense of classroom community. Absolutely. And that every student is a member of that, a valued member and crucial member of that classroom community. So I was really tried to be intentional with that, and did things, like had a beginning of the year picnic just for the families at a local park. So kind of off campus, but and at night, so allowing families to kind of get to know each other. And at that too, as I think something that kind of set our setting apart, or that I really appreciated about being in that setting, is that it was part of this the preschool was part of this larger community. It was a preschool through 8th grade school. Okay. Yeah. So also not just welcoming the students and families to this micro community, but welcoming them to the larger community too. Right.
That makes me think of something that I talked with Natalie Danner about, and there's an audio interview available on the website for people to listen to if they haven't. And she talked about Montessori and the kind of in relation to community and how kids, it's multi-age settings, right? And so how kids then are helping one another, and older kids leading another, and more like kind of that family dynamic. And one of the things that jumped out at me, and that kind of is jumping out here too, is that when you are in an inclusive setting and you're doing all these things and you're fostering this community, it's got to help to diminish the kind of othering that happens, or that can happen for children of any, be it other in terms of however they would be defined as other, right? We kind of know there's these kind of ways that we other people, right? And so one of the things that kind of struck me was that I wonder if in the Montessori setting, that multi-age helps to diminish that, right? As well as then in this setting that you're describing, creating that culture and community of inclusion helps to limit the othering that happens across the board. Did you experience anything that you felt you saw that kids were, really, really connecting and bonding to each other as a result of kind of some of the strategies you were using to create that community?
Absolutely. And I would have social stories is another thing that I would use. I had a student that needed extra support with transitions. And it got to the point where other students would go and grab it for him. And just when it was just, we never made a big deal. I mean, almost every student had something that they needed, something that they were working on, whether it was because of a disability, I had a lot of English language learners. I had students with, that had experienced trauma and had stuff going. I mean, everybody came to the table needing something. Right. Or even, the need of being a 3-year-old away from your mom for the first time. Like, that everybody needed something.
Yeah.
And so I think that was just part of the flow of the room is that, this is what so-and-so needs, this is
Mm-hmm.
what so-and-so needs, this is just,
Yeah, and that can be really helpful because, again, then you're defining this concept as fair, as everyone getting what they need, which is a big shift for kids, but really makes sense to them, is what I've discovered. Even years ago, as a classroom teacher and as a mom, if my kids are stomping their feet about it, I simply say, well, but are you getting what you need, right? And that's kind of what you're describing that you were working to create. So that's very very exciting. And the other thing I noticed as you talk is that it sounds as though the things that you were doing to promote inclusion and to include children with disabilities and other needs are things that are good for all kids.
exactly, like the visual schedule,
Mm-hmm.
that's something that benefited my students that had a hard time with transitioning, so that they always knew, this is
What
what
was
we're
coming.
doing, this is what's coming. They would usually be the one whose job it was to move the clip
Oh,
down,
sure.
and kind of
Mm-hmm.
keep, be our schedule keeper or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it benefited everybody. And you'd have, other students that would be saying, oh, it's time, I see we're going to
Right.
gym today, and it helped the language learners to have those visuals. So those
Oh, sure.
are
Mm-hmm.
supports to have in place that really benefit everybody. And with the solution kit, that was a support that helped me as the teacher.
Uh-huh.
Because, when you have them able to solve their own problems and to navigate those complex
Mm-hmm.
social competencies, it really
Yeah.
works
Yeah.
for everybody.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the schedule is even helpful for somebody who's just really type A, right? I mean,
Right,
if I walk into something, there's no agenda, no meeting, I'm like, where's the schedule? I want to know, and
Right.
I'm just a regular type A person, right? So
Right.
it's helpful for all. So
Well, and
that's
that
really interesting.
predictability and
Mm-hmm.
consistency was huge. So we had flexibility in the things that we were doing, but we also had a fairly consistent
Mm-hmm.
routine.
Sure. Yeah.
And routines within routines
right.
within routines within
Right.
within
Right.
routines. So, we'd have our routine of circle time, and in that circle time, first we would do this, then we would do this, then we would,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and that helps too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, good. So, what barriers did you or your program face to becoming more inclusive, and what suggestions do you have for others who might be facing similar barriers to, creating a community that's more inclusive?
Yeah, well, like I said, with the overall goal of it being a really positive and successful experience for everybody, knowing that it just was not an appropriate placement for some
Mm-hmm.
students. But actually, that I know of, I don't think we ever had anybody that we had to turn away.
Mm-hmm.
But just thinking more broadly, if there was a child with more complex needs, then we would be able to address and provide those related
Mm-hmm.
services, then it wouldn't necessarily be the most appropriate setting for that student to be
Mm-hmm.
successful.
Right.
So that would be one potential barrier. But one piece of advice that I would have is just to be open to it and figure out what you don't focus on what you can't
Mm-hmm.
do. That wasn't our mindset of like, we cannot take
Right.
X, Y, and Z type of kids. It was more, who can,
Uh-huh.
who can come here, who can we welcome, and what can we do so that this child that wants to come, that has this situation going on, can be
Mm-hmm.
welcomed and included here, and what, kind of do some of that front planning through the admission process of
Mm-hmm. Of what
of
you
what
could
they might
do.
what we
Yeah.
could do. And then too, to just be more creative in your resources.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, we did not have social workers on staff,
Okay.
but the school was able to partner with the local university that was like kitty corner to the school, and have social work interns. So then it was kind of mutually beneficial
Sure.
that these students then had a guaranteed placement, and then also our students were able to have social work services from
Sure. Yeah.
eager students who
Yeah.
were
Right. Yeah.
anxious and excited to help.
Right. So I'm hearing you say, be creative and think about what you can do, and navigate other avenues than what are kind of your first responses, solutions, and find ways to see if you can make it work.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
find your people, find your community. So I know I can only speak to my experiences in Catholic schools, but I know there are other Catholic educators at other schools, at other programs, that are also really committed to inclusion, and they're on social media,
Right.
they're on, so finding those resources and making those connections, I think is really important too, so that you're not in it alone. And I think it's helpful to find other people that have similar experiences and can walk you through it.
Sure. Right. Yeah. So kind of in that same vein, then, what do you have specific programs or recommendations that you would have for either parents and teachers, to support inclusion in a faith-based kind of program or community?
Again, I can only speak to what I know of
Mm-hmm.
from the Catholic perspective. So I know, like, for example, the University of Notre Dame has a wonderful program for supporting inclusion. So that's just one example. But I would encourage people to look within their own faith or denomination, and it sounds silly, but just Google.
Right.
Start with Google and see what's out there. And if there isn't anything, start something. And I bet you'll find people quickly.
Yeah, yeah, and sometimes it is as kind of, I don't like to use the word basic, but as simple or as basic as simply Googling and seeing what comes up, because as anybody knows, if you Google one thing, you end up in a rabbit trail that then takes you somewhere else, and maybe you'll find something, right? But this program that you're talking about you said at Notre Dame, yeah. So we'll post the resource to that program and the link in the notes below for everyone to be able to access. So kind of as we wrap, what advice would you, if you could just give kind of one key piece, right? What advice would you give to programs that are looking to be more inclusive?
Don't close the door. So I think that was really hard for us as parents to hear, we just don't know what to do with your son. That was heartbreaking to us.
Sure.
And we really wanted a faith-based education for our son, and that choice was taken away from us. So I'm also a big advocate for public education. Now, both of my kids are in public schools, so it's not that it's one is better than the other or what. I think it should be a family's choice.
Sure.
And bring it back to the parents and what they want for their child. And if a family wants a faith-based education for their child, I don't think that door should necessarily be closed. And maybe you're not in a place where you can have the door wide open, but crack it.
Right. Well, good. Well, thank you again for being here, and we appreciate your time. And again, like I said, you can find resources below the video to the program at Notre Dame, as well as other resources that Courtney shared. So thank you. Thanks again.
Thank you.